5 years. That's how long Evan Carter had been chasing this moment. 5 years of working late nights as a financial analyst in Seattle while dragging himself through an MBA program he paid for on his own. 5 years of holding on to the idea that maybe, just maybe, his family would finally see him as more than the quiet, awkward son who never fit the mold they wanted. He had been open about being gay since college, and from the very start. His parents treated it like a stain they could never wash away. Compared to his older brother Ryan, the golden boy with the booming laugh and a wife and children, Evan was the shadow that never quite reached the light. They said it in subtle ways. A pause before introducing him to friends. The way his father's voice flattened when the subject of Evan's personal life came up. His mother's habit of changing the topic as if she could erase him with small talk. But still, he kept the peace. Family, he told himself, was worth the effort. This degree was supposed to be the bridge. His ticket to stand in front of them and prove he was more than the version they had decided on. That's why he had been so careful. He booked 6 seats for the graduation ceremony, 2 for his parents, flying up from California, 1 for his younger sister Claire in Phoenix, and 3 more for his closest friends from high school, the ones who used to swear they'd always be there for each other. Since Evan was single, those friends were the family he chose. When his parents promised over the phone, "We'll be there," he let himself believe them. He imagined his mother's proud smile, his father's nod of approval, the sound of his name echoing in the auditorium, followed by the warmth of applause from people who knew how much this meant. It was going to be the kind of day you remember decades later, the kind that erases old wounds, even just for an afternoon. Seattle's spring air felt different in the days leading up to the ceremony. The streets shimmered after the rain. Coffee shops were filled with students cramming for finals, and Evan walked with a quiet hum under his breath. He could almost see it the moment he'd step off that stage, diploma in hand, looking toward the reserve section and knowing his family had kept their word. The empty years between them would shrink in the light of that shared moment. He told himself not to overthink, not to brace for disappointment. This time, there would be no excuses. He had sent them the schedule months ago, checked in again after booking their flights, even made dinner reservations for after the ceremony. Everything was set. All they had to do was show up. But somewhere beneath his careful optimism, an unease lingered. Memories of birthdays with 1 or 2 missing faces. The Christmas when Ryan's family got snowed in, but still posted photos from a sunny beach. The unspoken rule that Evan's milestones mattered less than Ryan's casual weekends. Still, he shook it off. People change, they learn, they outgrow. And maybe when the stakes were high enough, they showed up. In his apartment the night before the ceremony, the graduation gown hung neatly on the back of his bedroom door. The cap balanced on the dresser beside a small pin and enamel rainbow flag he planned to wear on his lapel. It wasn't a statement, at least not for him. It was just part of who he was. The same way Ryan's wedding ring or Claire's cross necklace were part of theirs. Evan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, running his fingers over the printed tickets for those 6 seats. The paper felt thin, almost fragile. Still, it carried 5 years of sweat, exhaustion, and the stubborn hope that this time, the people who were supposed to care most would care enough. Outside, the city lights flickered against the clouds, and Evan let himself smile. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, they'd see him. But deep down, somewhere, he didn't want to look too closely. There was a question he couldn't silence. What if the seats stayed empty? And if they did, what would that really mean? Stay with Heart Stories for the next part, because sometimes the truth about who shows up for you isn't just about one day. It's about everything they've told you without saying a word. 2 months before graduation, the first crack appeared in Evan Carter's carefully built vision. It happened over a casual family group call. Ryan's voice came through the speaker, cheerful and unbothered, announcing that he and his wife were hosting a big barbecue by the pool. He rattled off the date, throwing in details about the new grill, the cousins who would be flying in, and the endless trays of food they were planning. Evan froze. The date Ryan had just named was the same day as his graduation ceremony. He spoke up, keeping his tone measured. He reminded them all that the schedule for his MBA ceremony had been sent months ago, that flights and seats were already booked. He had even talked to Ryan about it once before. Ryan's response was a small chuckle followed by, "Oh, come on, those ceremonies are just formalities. You pick up a piece of paper, sit through a few speeches, a barbecue with the whole family, that's something people actually remember." On the other end of the line, his parents chimed in almost at once. His father said it was rare for so many relatives to be in one place. His mother added that they'd celebrate with him properly another time, maybe with a dinner when things weren't so crowded. It wasn't outright cruelty, but the message landed sharp. The day he had been working toward for half a decade did not matter enough to reschedule a casual afternoon by a pool. Evan didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that protest only made them double down. Instead, he told himself that at least his sister Claire still planned to attend, and that his 3 closest friends from high school would fill the other seats. Those friends had been there for him in the messy middle years, through job rejections and the grind of night classes. If his family was too wrapped up in their own plans, he'd still have people in the audience who understood what the day meant. But the quiet optimism didn't last. 3 days before the ceremony, his phone lit up with back-to-back messages from 2 of those friends. They had run into Ryan, who had invited them to the barbecue. The words were casual. "We figured it'd be a good chance to see everyone we haven't seen in years," but the meaning was unmistakable. They had chosen the barbecue over him. Claire called that same night, her voice thin with regret. A work emergency had come up, and she couldn't get the time off to fly to Seattle. She said she'd watch the live stream if there was one. By the time the call ended, Evan could feel the air in his apartment closing in around him. The 6 seats he'd reserved now belonged to ghosts. He sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open, staring at the confirmation email for those tickets. 6 names printed neatly beside guest of Evan Carter. Now nothing more than placeholders for people who had made other choices. He thought about the awkward explanations he would give if anyone asked why his route was empty. Maybe he'd say they were running late. Maybe he'd avoid the question entirely. In the stillness of that evening, it sank in. This wasn't just bad timing or bad luck. It was the shape of a pattern he had known his entire life. His milestones were optional, his joy was negotiable, and when something else, anything else came along, they didn't hesitate to let go of him first. He didn't delete the names from the seating chart. Some part of him needed to see them there, a quiet acknowledgement of what he had hoped for and what he would face instead. He told himself he'd walk across that stage no matter who was watching, because the work he had done still counted. Yet deep down, he understood that walking into that auditorium would feel different now. The applause wouldn't erase the empty chairs. Sometimes the hurt isn't in the words spoken, but in the ease with which people choose not to be there. And sometimes that absence teaches you more about the truth of your connections than their presence ever could. The morning of the ceremony arrived under a pale, wet sky, the kind Seattle seemed to specialize in. A fine mist clung to the streets, softening the edges of the buildings as Evan Carter buttoned his new Navy suit. On the lapel, he fixed the small rainbow pin he had set aside weeks earlier. It caught the light from his bedroom window, a quiet statement against the gray outside. He checked his reflection, smoothed his tie, and slipped into the gown he had hung carefully the night before. Driving to campus, the windshield wipers kept a slow rhythm, brushing away beads of rain. He imagined the auditorium filled with graduates and their cheering families, flashes from cameras, bouquets of flowers cradled in arms. His own section would be easy to find 6 seats together in the reserved area, each labeled guest of Evan Carter. The thought made his chest tighten, though not from pride. As he walked toward the venue, a tide of people surged around him. Some carried balloons and gift bags. Others held umbrellas over elderly relatives. Laughter rose in pockets, bursts of conversation floating in the damp air. At the edge of the seating area, he spotted his row immediately. 6 chairs in a neat line, their crisp white cards untouched, each one bearing his name. Not a coat draped over a backrest, not a bag left to hold a spot, just emptiness. He kept moving, forcing his gaze forward. In the lobby, classmates hugged their parents. Friends posed for photos with arms slung over each other's shoulders. A woman in his cohort cradled her infant as her partner adjusted the baby's blanket, both beaming. Evan smiled politely at the few people who greeted him, but did not linger. The hum of joy around him was almost deafening. When his name was called on stage, he stepped into the light. The applause was polite, even warm, but his eyes drifted toward the block of empty chairs in the audience. He had expected the sight to sting, but it felt stranger than that, like looking at a picture with part of the image missing. He accepted the diploma, shook hands with the dean, and walked back to his seat with the same measured stride he had practiced in his mind. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled out into the courtyard. Grads held their caps in the air for group photos. Parents wiped away tears. Professors shook hands and clapped shoulders. Evan stood to one side, adjusting his gown, the diploma folder balanced in his hand. No one approached him with flowers. No camera flashes marked his moment. He simply turned toward the parking lot, the chatter fading behind him. As he reached his car, his phone buzzed. A message from Ryan lit up the screen. "See the BBQ pics yet? Everyone had a blast. Swing by when you get a chance." The words were almost casual, as if the day hadn't been his graduation at all. Before he could process the irritation building in his chest, another notification appeared. This time, it wasn't a text, it was his call log, flashing with more than 40 missed calls from his mother's number. In that moment, standing between the echo of an empty ceremony and the unanswered calls stacking on his screen, Evan understood something deeper. Success can be measured in degrees, titles, and accomplishments, but its weight changes entirely depending on who chooses to stand with you when you earn it. And sometimes the silence of the people you expect most becomes its own kind of lesson, that the validation you seek from others may never come, and yet your achievement still belongs wholly to you. The 40 missed calls were still on Evan Carter's phone screen when he swiped to return one. His mother's voice came through fast, clipped, almost panicked. She told him his nephew Ryan's oldest had fallen at the pool during the barbecue. "A broken arm," she said, "from a slide gone wrong. They were at the hospital now." Her tone made it sound urgent, though not life-threatening. Before she could say more, she urged him to come. Evan hesitated only briefly. Whatever the distance between them, the boy was innocent in all of it. He drove through the drizzle toward the hospital, the windshield reflecting the shifting reds and greens of traffic lights. His graduation gown lay folded in the passenger seat, the rainbow pin still fixed to his lapel like a quiet witness. Inside the pediatric wing, the smell of antiseptic mixed with the muted hum of hospital machines. Evan found the room quickly. Ryan was at the far side of the bed, speaking in low tones to a nurse. His parents stood near the foot of the bed with several relatives clustered around, filling the small space with murmurs. Every head turned when Evan stepped inside. Surprise flickered across faces like he was an unexpected guest in a place that should have felt like shared ground. His nephew's eyes lit up the moment he saw him. Evan crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, his voice soft as he asked how the boy was feeling. The child lifted his arm, now wrapped in a white cast, and told him about the slide and the sudden fall. Evan listened, smiling gently, and promised to sign the cast before he left. Then he stood, his gaze sweeping the room. It landed on Ryan, then on his parents. "It's strange," Evan said, his voice even but carrying a weight that silenced the shuffling in the room. "Everyone could come together for a broken arm, but not for the day I worked 5 years to reach." His mother shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the floor. "It was just a ceremony," she murmured, as if the words could shrink the significance to something forgettable. Ryan cleared his throat and changed the subject, asking the nurse about follow-up appointments. Evan didn't raise his voice. There was no anger in his tone, only a finality that landed sharper than shouting. "Thank you for showing me exactly where I stand in this family." The words sat between them like a stone dropped into still water, ripples moving outward until the silence felt thick enough to touch. He returned to his nephew's side, adjusting the blanket and asking if he needed anything. His back turned to the others. It was easier that way not to see the discomfort in their eyes or the quick glances they traded. When he left the hospital room, the hallway felt cooler, the air lighter. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Adrian's name lit up the screen. Evan answered, expecting a quick word of congratulations or maybe a check-in about the day. Instead, Adrian's voice carried an edge he had never heard before. He said he'd been at the ceremony earlier, one of the only ones there for Evan, and had overheard something afterward. Ryan had been speaking to a group of friends, laughing as he explained it was better to let Evan walk alone so they wouldn't have to deal with posing for photos with him and that rainbow pin of his. Evan stopped walking, the fluorescent lights overhead suddenly harsher. The explanation for their absence, for the barbecue scheduled so deliberately over his milestone, was not just carelessness. It was rooted in the quiet prejudice that had threaded through his family's treatment of him for years. The clarity was bitter but steady. Sometimes, the wound isn't in being forgotten, it's in realizing you were never meant to be included at all. And in that knowledge there is a shift, the understanding that dignity comes not from forcing a place at someone else's table, but from walking away, knowing your worth is not up for their approval. Evan Carter sat in his car outside the hospital for a long moment after Adrian's call ended, the rain pooling along the edges of the windshield. He could feel the words settling in, heavier with each breath. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just selfish scheduling. It was deliberate. Ryan's laughter, the mention of that rainbow pin small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, but apparently large enough to justify leaving a brother to stand alone, cut deeper than any casual absence ever could. That night, Evan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tracing the years of small exclusions and passing remarks that had led here. The birthday dinners rescheduled for Ryan's work trips. The holidays where his +1 was never welcome if it was a man. The way his parents' smiles always seemed tighter when his life brushed up against his truth. By morning, his decision was set. He would stop showing up to be overlooked. No more booking flights for family events. No more clearing his schedule to fit into theirs. He wouldn't block them or cut every tie he still cared for his niece and nephew, but he would no longer place himself in spaces where his presence was tolerated at best, unwanted at worst. Weeks passed in quiet. He poured himself into work, the new diploma hanging framed above his desk. Adrian checked in often, inviting him to gatherings with friends who asked about his research projects, laughed at his dry humor, and never made him feel like an outsider. Then, 1 month later, an unexpected envelope arrived in his mailbox. Intaites de Chemed was an invitation printed on heavy cardstock. Graduation celebration for Evan Carter. It read in ornate script, with Ryan listed as the host. A note in Ryan's handwriting added, "Hope you can make it this time. Everyone will be there." Evan's first instinct was disbelief. Then Adrian forwarded him a screenshot of a trending post in the Seattle LGBT community page. It was Adrian's own words, no names mentioned, about attending a friend's graduation and seeing an entire row of empty seats reserved for his family. The post had been shared hundreds of times, sparking conversations about silent prejudice and the quiet ways it still shapes lives. People from Ryan's professional circle had commented, asking pointed questions. The pressure had found him. Evan decided to attend the gathering. He walked into polite applause. Relatives offering congratulations as if nothing had happened. Ryan clapped him on the shoulder and steered him toward a cake with "We're proud of you," piped in bright blue frosting. Evan smiled, thanked them, made small talk. But deep down, he knew this wasn't a change of heart, it was damage control. The kind of celebration born from reputation, not remorse. When he got home, he set the leftover slice of cake on the counter and looked at the framed diploma on his wall. It struck him then, the truest recognition he'd ever received came not from people trying to save face, but from those who had shown up without hesitation on the day it mattered. From Adrian in the audience, from himself, refusing to let their absence define the worth of his work. The empty seats had once felt like proof that he didn't belong. Now they were a reminder that he had built his achievements on ground they could never shake. And maybe that was the real victory. Have you ever faced a moment where someone's absence spoke louder than their presence? What did you do with that truth? Share your story below. And if Evan's journey resonated with you, subscribe to Heart Stories for more stories that honor the strength it takes to stand in your own worth.